Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, the honorable judges. In this fine day, I would like to introduce you myself. My name is Farryzki Noor Thoriq. I'm from Senior High School 1 Bojonegoro and acting as a chairman of and the head of the opposition side of the House. Would like to deliver a speech on the motions of this House prefer the strategy of defunding the police rather to address the police abuse and misconduct rather than pushing for institutional reform. First, I would like to say stated rebuttals from the for the government side of the House that has previously on the video. First is that it is ineffective to reform the police since the current administrations of the United States are pushing towards more aggressive part of handling the people, and like using the National Guards or literally army personnel to handle riots and the people like once in Wisconsin City, United States. And so I think that it's largely unrealistic to enact the institutional reform to the police. And it is not true where certain police departments were racist. In fact, almost all of the police department were racist. And study from University of Maryland stated that almost 40% of the male black populations were arrested in the United States. That's almost half of the total population of the black male people. It serves as the evidence that almost if not all, the police department were implementing a racist policy. And the third is that defunding the police is not creating more problems because the extra funding of the police itself that has created the problem in the first place. That the Law Enforcement Act back in Reagan administrations that the gears and weapon that transformed the police department into such a violence and corrupt body. So I think the Prime Minister of the government side of the House said it's not true and not based on any evidence because the extra fund of the police will use to buy military gears and weapons back in Reagan administrations. And next, I want to say status quo on my cases. First is that the last amount of violence and racism that American police had on its own citizens create a large-scale problems in the country. In this year alone, as of July 2020, there were approximately 998 fatal shootings by the police. This is due to the fact that in the past 15 years, Reagan administration and the police continue to be armed and militarized. And rather than focusing on policing duties, they just throw themselves into the people with militarized guns. And me, as the leader opposition of the House, pushes for defunding the police to solve this problem and prevent it from happening again. And then we have definitions to lightly interpreting our motions and to avoid any ambiguity. I would like to state some definitions to our side of the House, often in this case. First is the police is the civil force of a national or local government responsible for prevention and detection of crimes and maintaining public orders. And second is the military, relating all to characteristics of armed forces. And third is fund, a sum of money saved or made available for particular purposes. And third is institutional reforms, is the process of reviewing and restructuring the state institutions that they respect human rights, preserve rule of law, and accountable for the constituent. And we as the opposition side of the House would like to point our limitations to this point. First is that defunding the police is only implemented to the specific amount of police budget like armament expenditure, military gear and weapon. And second is that defunding would not cut the majority of the police budget. And third is that police will still have a budget for law enforcement, civil education, patrols, and other crucial matters for the security of the state. And the last is that this reform would only taken in the United States of America. And then the urgency. The opposition side of the House have an urgent point why this policy is needed to be implemented as follows. First is that the alarming rate of the police militarization is causing the extra violence, racism, and ineffectiveness of the police department of the United States of America. And the second is that police using the fund it had to militarize itself rather than to establish law and order to the people. This fact since 2005 where Reagan administration used Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to serve as intermediaries for the police militarizations. So the problem here lies clearly with the budget itself. They don't spend it on the police functions, but instead militarize itself under unclear purposes. And then the racism had to endure in America for centuries needed to be end. Because they supposed to serve on its very own citizens. And they have it on their constitution like all men were created equal. And then goals. The opposition side of the House have a specific goals with the support and implementation of the policy based on the motions. These are first to calm the public and violence that occurs of the misconduct and bad treatment of the police to the general populace. And second is to returning the function of the police as a man of the people and keep them safe. And third is to prevent further police aggressions and mistreatment into the populations. And fourth is to prevent indoctrination of racism toward the police department itself. And fifth is to maintaining peace, stability, and harmony to the nations. And we have a mechanisms executable mechanism that will enable us to implement this policy. First, it will create bills specifically ban the use of war gear in handling of law enforcement of the population and enacting it to the highest political order in the country, so that in the Senate and House of Representatives, which has now become Act of the Congress of the United States of America, the second highest law in the countries, and then incorporated those bills into state and local laws, and then seizing all of the military gear and weapons that the police have, and then cutting off the specific military budget to state government, and then socialize the function of police into the local states. And then the argument. Our side of the House has an argument why our motion and especially our policy on supporting and implementing is uttermost important. First is that racism must be wiped out from the face of the earth. Because it is fundamental things of the human right, and it's also racism that prohibited the United States constitutions and stated that all men were created equal, and adding to that fact that the United States once fought a war against racism in the Civil War but in 1860s, and to this day they haven't quite resolved the problem of racism completely. So to honor our founding fathers and others that came before, we must wipe out this racism for the very institutions that help to promote them, and that's the police department. And second is that police can reform themselves unless they are forced by the higher power. Trusting the reform to the police themselves isn't quite a thing. They consider they are equal because they are considering themselves equal to the military in use of arms. A push for internal reform is unrealistic if the higher powers above it, like governors or president, push for reform themselves. And third is that stability is achieved to maintain harmony and not the use of arms. The use of military arms by the police is not the correct and best way to enforce law, and makes it only worse. And countless misconduct, bad treatment, killings by the police is it due to the fact that they are using the budget for equipping themselves with weapons and not maintaining order and police functions. And this is contrast to the original functions of the police, which the original function is the man of the people and maintaining order and stability to the words and ability, and not the use of arms. This is our speech and represented the hearts and mind of the opposition side of the House. Me as the leader of the opposition side of the House say thank you for the honorable judges who has listened to my speech, and lastly, thank you very much to you all.